Okay, so we are now with your biodiversity, which is under your chapter 7 in your science. Okay, so let me share first with your module. Okay, so the title for this is about the biodiversity. So when you say biodiversity class, bio means, okay, so when you say bio means life, and then diversity means varieties. Okay, so this one. So here, so the objectives of this module as follows. So it is to determine the relativeness of society, environment, and health. So which means on how the relationship determined, okay, through the presence of the society, the environment, and then the health. Okay, number 2 is to discuss the ethics and implications of genetically modified organisms. So the last part of our module is about GMO. Okay, so as I have said, bio means life, diversity means varieties. So when you say biodiversity, they have 3 components. So these are the genetic diversity, the species diversity, and that is your ecosystem diversity. When you say genetic diversity, came from the word genes, lahi, okay, from generation to next generation. Okay, so this is about the species of individuals. So bawat isa, hindi lamang ito classes about the humans, but also with the animals. They are considered as living organisms. Okay, the bacteria, the viruses, okay, all the living organisms, eukaryotes man yan or prokaryotes. So when you say that with a presence of nucleus, yun yung mahirap intindihin, lalo na pag under the business management. So which means na lahat ng living organisms, even the bacteria or the viruses, they have the capacity to multiply. Dumadami. Okay. So in all living organisms, there is a presence of genes, lahi. Kaya nga, for example, the ferns, the the plants. Diba? So like for example, pag nagputol ka ng isang leaf niya at meron kang green thumb, sabi niya, pag idinikit mo yan, dumadami sila. Because that is one of the characteristics of a living organism. They can reproduce. Okay. So ang living organisms, they need also some para sila ay makapag-multiply. And all of this are part of biodiversity. In genetic diversity, okay, came from the word genes. Okay, these are the differences in according to genes. So these are the species of individuals. So these are sequence of DNA which dictate the traits of characteristics. So like for example, the features of a person. Okay, so like for example, saan mo kaya nakuha ang yung magandang or maaliwalas na mata? Your curly hair. All of this is pinasa from generation to next generation through the presence of this what you call the DNA. It's about the traits or characteristics of an organism. Considered as a variation in small scale, which is an impact, however, in a larger scale. This gene differences contributes in the adaptive potential of the species that can more importantly lead to microevolution. So this variation which are enabled in order to produce a new population. So like for example here the hogs, which are determined through the different breeds. So binibreed nila. So like for example the gomamela. If you notice, the gomamela are made up of different varieties. Merong kulay pula, merong may combination, but same, they are called as gomamelas. Okay, so it's about the breed of every generation or every part or every kind of a gomamela. Insects. Okay, so each of them ay meron silang functions. Okay, so insects belongs to different orders. So napapansin nyo, maraming insects sa atin, but they have different families. Okay, it says here that a fungal pathogen may either infect a species single crop or different varieties. So when you say fungus, okay, so they are fungus from generation to next generation, they have different components or pathogens. So the crop may be grouped differentially based on the genetic markers. Okay, so why are these so? So this boiled down to differences in DNA sequence and the percentage of nucleotides present. How about when you say species diversity, which is as a second component of your biodiversity? Species which involve the number of species. Ilang dami ba? Ilang piraso ba? Like for example, the monkey-eating eagle. So pag nagkaroon na ng depletion or hindi na sila nag-i-exist, ito ay pinakikialaman ng government because they are necessarily. Okay, yes, species is a group of interbreeding organisms with similar structures. Basta meron siyang number of species that is under the species diversity. Okay, a new species are added every day kasi may nanganganak. Okay, one of the characteristics nagmo-multiply. It is believed that insects are the most diverse. A gram of soil is composed of different species also of microbes. Okay, even the number of birds, the rabbits, the alligators, the fishes, they have number of species. Community or ecological diversity, which is under the ecosystems, which is the third part of the biodiversity. It is about the biological community includes the abiotic factors. So when you say abiotic, which means that is under the non-living. But when you say biotic, it refers to the living. So ano yung mga abiotic examples? So like for example, the winds, the water, hindi sila mga buhay, but kailangan sila sa ecosystem. Okay? Aquatic ecosystems may be a fresh water. When you say aquatic means water, so yung the marine, like the sea waters, the caustic waters, the fresh water, they are under the aquatic ecosystems, basta pertaining to water. When you say terrestrial ecosystem, terrestrial came from the forest words, which are called as the grassland, the forest, the desert. So yung mga desierto, they are considered as terrestrial ecosystem. Okay, this ecosystem species population. So sometimes naglalagas na rin yung mga number of species, for example, in the forests. One of the factors doon yung pagkakainin, yung pagpuputol ng mga punong kahoy. Why? Because some of the animals, ang kanilang buhay, or their house or their habitats ay nasa trees. So yung pagpuputol ng punong kahoy, one of the cause kung bakit nawawala rin siya. Ano pa yun? Pagsusunog. So nangyayari, in order to survive life, that is one of the characteristics of a living organisms, lumilipat sila ng kanilang bahay in order to survive life. Their survival and interactions are mediated and influenced by the variety of non-living, or that is what you call the abiotic factors, like for example, the air, the water, the temperature, the humidity. Diba, like for example, sa Alaska, mga polar bears, okay, they have naman hair para mag-cover. Pero minsan may mga time, pag sobrang lamig sa Alaska, lumilipat sila ng kanilang tahanan because they are in order to survive life. Ecosystem diversity is a huge importance from the point of interesting species. Okay, an ecosystem also interacts with another ecosystem in order to survive life. So, yung sustainable, pag-sustain ng kanilang pangangailangan kasi ay maaari, that is one of the causes kung bakit sila ay nawawala. So, in order to sustain their needs, okay, they need to adapt or they need to interact with another ecosystem. Okay, so importance of biodiversity. How important is biodiversity in the environment or in the earth? Okay, affects humans on varieties of aspects. So for example, environmental issues. So pag may problema sa environment, so for example, air pollution, noise pollution, some of this nakakahina rin ng variety that affects humans. Okay, so for example, pag may shortages sa palay, diba? So pag may shortages, tumataas ang level ng ating bilihin. Okay, the fundamental importance of biodiversity is that in our source of foods, clothing, shelter, and then the medicine. So for example, during the time of paglabas ng COVID, ibang transportation ang nagkakaroon ng problema. Why? Kasi baka lumaganap ang virus, okay, from one place to another place. Biodiversity is also a source of raw materials for industrial activities. Okay, so humans enjoy different products and goods, clean air and water, soil and water sources due to biodiversity. So for example, pag clean ang area, nag-enjoy yung tao. Ikaw naman kaya, pag ikaw ay nakatira sa tabi nung piggery, ano naamoy mo? Yung amoy ng pupo ng pigs. So, maaliwalas ba yun? No, it is not. So, anong gagawin mo? You have to close the door. So, hindi rin maganda. So, you are living in an environment na you are not enjoying. Life would be boring if there is no variation around us. So there are two fundamental sciences, which are the taxonomy and then the ecology, that generate knowledge and information para maintindihan ang biodiversity in order to survive life among humans. So yun yung kanilang specialization. Okay? So biodiversity, however, there is some limitations for the study. So first one here is that biodiversity conservation strategies focus on research and policy on global scale. That affects the local diversity. Lack of site-specific data. So the composition of the communities, biodiversity studies lacking in taxonomic precision, few. But in other words, which means that ang kanilang studies about the knowledge ay minsan ay nagiging cause ng problema. Okay, status of Philippine biodiversity. Okay, so like for example, the Philippines being a tropical and archipelagical country. So if you notice here, with this box, okay, nakalagay dito about the shortages of the presence of mammals, the reptiles. So there are different, these are the different kinds or types of living organisms on Earth. So when you say mammals, naalala niyo ba sa sciences niyo, ito yung mga animals na nag-feed sila through breastfeeding. Okay, so like for example, we are under the mammals. Okay, the monkeys, the reptiles, so the amphibians. So when you say amphibians, they live in water and at the same time, they live on land. So like for example, the frogs. So may mga number of species na dahan-dahan na nawawala. So here in the status of Philippine biodiversity, it says that in 2014, the data is that there are 211 wild fawning animals and 526 wild flora, which are threatened. So delikado, nawawala na sila at nauubos. So these are the summary of the threatened wildlife species. Hindi siya masyadong ano ha. So which means that in 2014, meron pang 43 under the land mammals and then lumiliit or humihina habang tumatagal. So which means meron depletion, kakulangan. So that is what you call the threats of biodiversity. So yung kanilang data nagpapakita na nawawala na ang ating iba't ibang nag-i-exist na living organisms. So ang nag-aaral yun is about the taxonomy or then the ecology. So merong taxonomic group. So what are the threats to biodiversity? What are the cause? The first one here is the habitat. So pagkasira ng kanilang bahay through kaingin, pagpuputol ng punong kahoy, deforestation, pagsusunog, okay, ginagawang through urbanization, ginagawang subdivision. What happened? So nagiging buildings. Wala nang matitirhan ng ating living organisms, the animals, even the plants. Wala nang halaman. Okay, gaano ba ka-importante ang plants? Yun yung, or the trees. Okay, sila yung mga sumisip-sip. If there is a presence of floods, if there is a presence of rain, heavy rains, so napupunta sa roots yun ng mga plants and plants and trees. So dahil yun ay nakakasira ng ating biodiversity. Okay, loss of biodiversity. Pollution. So like for example, pag nagsusunog lang, that is air pollution. Okay, yung hangin ay nasisikupan na ng mga maduduming hangin because of that air in the atmosphere. Loss of biodiversity can be worse as a result of numerous anthropogenic activities. So for example, urbanization. Okay, kung mag-urbanize sila, minsan sinusunog muna nila yung area. Construction, yung pag-flat, agriculture and development logging, so on and so forth. The use of pesticides and then the herbicides. So merong chemical components kasi yun na nakakasira ng ating atmosphere. Okay? How about when you say, okay, that is under the habitat destruction, pollution. It's about the presence of chemical components or the pesticides, also the chemicals which are present along the air. This can cause air pollution. Introduction of non-native species and new varieties. So yung paglabas ng mga bagong varieties ng species. So, non-native species o yung mga aliens, hindi naman nag-i-exist dito. Okay? So, their introduction to the local community could become a threat to other organisms. Maaari ito yung nakakasira sa ibang organisms. Okay? So, naging invasive. Okay, the introduced species may compete the native species for nutrients and food, leading to the latest population. So there are some, the fourth one here is what you call the global climate change. Okay, yung pagbabago-bago ng panahon. Like for example here, okay, na even nowadays, if you notice, ang tag-ulan dapat August. Yun yung area, July to August. If you notice, tag-init. That is what you call climate change. Pagbabago. Okay, that is what you call the global warming or global climate change. So there is a global increase in the world's temperature that threatens biodiversity. Okay, global warming, like for example, the meltdown of icebergs in the polar regions to lead the sea level rise. So for example, pag may icebergs, kadalasan nararamdaman natin yung ihip ng hangin na malamig because of that icebergs. Yung amihan. Yung kanyang ibinubuhos ang hangin, ang binubuhos ay malamig. That is the reason why nakakalanghap tayo ng malamig. And if that icebergs ay natutunaw through pag uminit na, ang area or yung level ng ating sea level ay tataas. Okay, from that natunaw na icebergs. Okay, hot summers and too cold winters, frequent grass and forest fires. So they are cause global climate change. Next is one is exploitation. So any form of abuse to flora and fauna threatens biological diversity, collecting them in huge amounts of threaten their proliferation. So gathering their organisms, especially the trading is punishable by law. So may mga batas na inilalabas na against the community or against the environment. So, meron silang inilalagay doon ng mga fine na kung sino yung magkukumit. Okay, overpopulation. Pag dumadami ang tao, okay, increase the demand of all human needs and wants also need to increase. So, nagkakaroon ng kakapusan because of that overpopulation. So, for example, pag 5 kayo sa isang pamilya, so kailangan nyo ng, ano ba yon? Kailangan nyo ng mas maraming isusustain para mabusog yung inyong family. What happened for this? Okay, class, so nagkakaroon ng nagkakapusan ng supply. Conserving biodiversity. Strategies to conserve biodiversity is that you need to realize, you give a solution for this. So dahil kinakapos. How to prevent this loss of biodiversity? Siyempre naman, prevented through appropriate research. So pumasok ang research dito, research studies. Whether needs and characteristics, especially during perpetuation, deserve attention. So education and awareness is one of the factors para maibsan at continuously masustain ang pangangailangan ng tao. Okay, community-based programs, government legislation. So these are the following Republic Act. Okay, for example, to protect about the games and fishes, so that is 2590. Okay, Philippine Mining Code. Recognizing the right of the culture and so on and so forth. So all of this. Okay, so several technologies are available to conserve and maintain the biodiversity. So these are the following. The cell and tissue culture allow the propagation and multiplication. Diba yung cell? Ang cell ay meron siyang DNA, which is inside the DNA ay kaya niya mag-multiply. So gumagawa sila noon. Okay, and conserving other resources para makapag-produce. Kaya nga lumalabas sa mga GMO. Okay, the rule of evolution in biodiversity. So in evolution may happen through artificial selection. So with your previous lesson about the natural and then the artificial selection, mahaba kasi ang proseso ng natural selection. But when you say artificial, like for example, yung pag-feed ng chicken, 45 days makapag-produce na tayo ng chicken para in order to sustain ng pangangailangan ng tao in terms of meat. Kung native kasi, it takes long. Okay, so nagpo-produce sila ng artificial selection. Or it is also with a natural selection. But some of this ay nagbe-breed na sila. Okay, if you notice, ano ba yung mga breeding? Napapansin niyo may mga bagong lumalabas ng mga kulay asong hindi mo that is under the breeding. Okay, para dumami. By natural selection, there are several points to remember. First is that it is inherited. Ibig sabihin from generation to next generation. Okay, so adaptations for the organism a better change to survive with the surroundings. So these special features they develop a long period of time, as I have said. So mahaba kasi ang proseso nila para mag-multiply. And this combination of rich orange and black on the monarch butterfly is an adaptation to warn potential predators. Okay, so for example, the butterfly is poisonous. Is poison and prevent it from being eaten. So ang butterfly ay piniprevent para, kasi they have their own functions. Okay, sila yung mga kumakain ng butterfly, they have their own functions para pumatay ng mga poisonous na insects. Okay, even yung mga lamok, yung mga dengue, nagkukos ng dengue, they can lessen because of that butterfly. Is it insect? The butterfly is poisonous and prevent it from being eaten. Okay, so, okay, wait. The combination of bright orange and black on the monarch butterfly is adaptation to warn potential predators. Okay, so there is some kasing butterflies that which are poisonous at piniprevent sila to eaten. Okay, kasi minsan pag kumakain, they even like for example the mushrooms, okay, there are poisonous and there are edible. Okay, so the camouflage, so when you say camouflage, like for example, in order to survive from their predators, okay, ano tawag noon? Nakikiayon sila sa kulay ng kanilang dinadapuan. So like for example, the lizards. May mga lizards na hindi siyang normal na lizards sa loob ng bahay. Okay, they can form a camouflage, which is, in order to survive and adapt the environment, they need para gawing kakulay ang kanilang dinadapuan. Okay, evolution may also be slow or rapid depending on the rate of the environmental change. So during the evolution, there is a speciation and extinction. Okay, extinction is the dying out of termination of species. So nawawala. This occurs due to the environmental factors, like for example the global change. Okay, the loss of habitats. Okay, so ano pa ba? Enter like inbreeding for reproduction. So mahina ang pag-reproduce. Okay, competition. And now we are with your GMO. So your GMO stands for genetically modified organisms. With your previous, under the genetic, kailangan ng genes. So kumukuha lang sila ng genes ng isang product, ng isang living organism, and then another living organisms in order to produce. Okay, the foreign genes may come from bacteria, viruses, insects, animals, or even the humans. So nag-enter breed. Okay? So these genes are carefully studied and selected to achieve the goal of improving a particular organisms so to produce a product. So the modification can be transgenetic, which is the DNA ang kinukuha nila sa genes, and then ito ay ipinoproduce or kinukombine ito with another gene. So the GMOs can include the plants, the animals, the microorganisms. Okay? So there are varieties of GMOs in order to for cloning. So ang ating cell ay meron siyang presence of DNA, this one. Okay, so in order to produce, gumagamit sila ng recombinant DNA, ginagamit din ng DNA at in order to produce, okay, in order to produce and even to cure some diseases. Yun ay under ng gene therapy. Okay, there are several organisms which are genetically modified through the introduction of technologies and discovery of the DNA. So your DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. So that is under the double helix. So para siyang dalawang ganyan. Okay, that is the structure of the DNA. And then so one of this, so lumalabas na rin, like for example, the corn, which is the corn was the first genetically modified with the insertion of toxins of genes. Okay, so pinapasok nila yun sa corn. Okay, pinapasok nila sa corn in order to produce. Okay, so in order to produce, not with a natural way to reproduce a corn. So cotton, also half of cottons grown in the world have been genetically modified. So the Jatropha, okay, the rice, okay, the golden rice, okay, the golden rice, papansin nyo may iba't ibang kulay na. So for example, the red rice. So they are under the GMO, which is mas lesser ang kanilang carbohydrates or cholesterol content. So here in the golden rice, ay meron siyang vitamin A content, which is becomes the developed variety and commercially many Filipinos will benefit from it. Okay, so The soy, so the soybeans. So 90% are genetically modified to be herbicide resistant. Okay, the sugar beets, cassava, so on and so forth. All of this ay considered na rin na nag-i-exist sa Philippines. Okay, the tomatoes, kung napapansin yung mga tomatoes, hindi na siya ordinaryong tomatoes na maliliit, malalaki na. So they are under the GMOs. The apples, okay, even the apples, iba't ibang varieties na rin. The peas, so they came, some of these came from different countries, and even the Philippines ay kaya na mag-produce. Impacts of GMOs, defined as known as useful genes would insert in the organism. So, ini-insert kasi siya sa isang organism ang DNA. Okay, para magkaroon ng varieties or makapag-reproduce ng iba't iba. So, that is the reason why gumumela sa iba't iba na rin ang kanilang product because of that reproducing from another or during using artificial insemination. Okay, so that is the end of your module 7, which is entitled as biodiversity. Okay, so your tawag nito, yung inyong gawain class is after the foundation week. Okay, so you have to relax next week.